everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library in Ringe, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day I read a little bit of a book to you, and eventually we finish a whole book together. And the book we're reading right now is The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. And I'm pretty excited because today we're going to finish the book. I've been really enjoying it. A lot has happened, and I'm excited to see exactly how it ends. A lot's happened in the story, but so we have our Princess Irene and her friend Curdie, and the goblins who live below her kingdom. They attacked and came into the castle, and they tried to get Irene, but did they get her? Do you remember? They didn't! That's right. So the Queen Goblin and the King Goblin retreated down back to the mines, and Irene was safe with Curdie's mom. And that was where we ended. She was safe, and the goblins had left, but let's see what else happens. We have to wrap up our story. Are you ready? Chapter 29 is called Mason Work. Curdie had remembered all at once the resolution of the goblins to carry out their second plan upon the failure of the first. No doubt they were already busy, and the mine was therefore in the greatest danger of being flooded and rendered useless, not to speak of the lives of the miners. So because their plan to get the princess failed, they're going to flood the mines and ruin them for everybody. When Curdie reached the mouth of the mine, after rousing all the miners within reach, he found his father and a good many more just entering. They all hurried to the gang by which he had found a way into the goblin country. There the sight of Peter had already collected a great many blocks. The foresight of Peter, Curdie's dad, had already collected a great many blocks of stone with cement, ready for building up the weak place, well known to the goblins. Although there was not room for more than two to be actually building at once, they managed, by setting all the rest to work in preparing the cement and passing the stones, to finish in the course of a day a huge buttress filling the whole place and supported everywhere by the live rock. Before the hour when they usually stopped work, they were satisfied the mine was secure. They had heard goblin hammers and pickaxes busy all the time, and at length fancied that they heard sounds of water they had never heard before. But that was otherwise accounted for when they left the mine, for they stepped out into a tremendous storm which was raging all over the mountain. The thunder was bellowing, and the lightning was lancing out of a huge black cloud which lay above it, and hung down its edges a thick mist over its sides. The lightning was breaking out of the mountain too, and flashing up into the cloud. From the state of the brooks, now swollen into raging torrents, it was evident that the storm had been storming all day. The wind was blowing as if it would blow him off the mountain, but, anxious about his mother and the princess, Curdie darted up through the thick of the storm. Even if they had not set out before the storm came on, he did not judge them safe, for in such a storm even their poor little house was in danger. Indeed, he soon found that, but for a huge rock against which it was built, and which protected it both from the blasts and the waters, it must have been swept if it was not blown away. For the two torrents into which this rock parted the rush of water behind it united again in front of the cottage, two roaring and dangerous streams, which his mother and the princess could not possibly have passed. It was with great difficulty that Curdie forced his way through one of them and up to the door. The moment his hand fell on the latch, through all the uproar of winds and waters came the joyous cry of the princess. "There's Curdie! Curdie! Curdie!" She was sitting wrapped in blankets on the bed, his mother trying for the 100th time to light the fire which had been drowned by the rain that came down the chimney. The clay floor was one mass of mud, and the whole place looked wretched. But the faces of the mother and the princess shone as if their troubles only made them the merrier. Curdie burst out laughing at the sight of them. "I never had such fun," said the princess, her eyes twinkling. "How nice it must be to live in a cottage on the mountain." "It all depends on what kind your inside house is," said the mother. "I know what you mean," said Irene. "That's the kind of thing my grandmother says." By the time Peter returned, the storm was nearly over, but the streams were so fierce and swollen that it was not only out of the question for the princess to go down the mountain, but most dangerous for Peter even, or Curdie, to make the attempt in the gathering darkness. "They will be dreadfully frightened about you," said Peter to the princess, "but we cannot help it. We must wait till the morning." With Curdie's help, the fire was lighted at last, and the mother set about making their supper. And after supper, they all told the princess stories till she grew sleepy. Then Curdie's mother laid her in Curdie's bed, which was a tiny little garret room. As soon as she was in bed, through a little window low down in the roof, she caught sight of her grandmother's lamp shining far away beneath, and she gazed at the beautiful silvery globe until she fell asleep. And that was the end of chapter 29. We're almost done. Chapter 30 is called The King and the Kiss. The next morning the sun rose so bright that Irene said the rain had washed his face and let the light out clean. The torrents were still roaring down the side of the mountain, but they were so much smaller as not to be dangerous in the daylight. After an early breakfast, Peter went to his work, and Curdie and his mother set out to take the princess home. They had difficulty in getting her dry across the streams, and Curdie had again and again to carry her. But at last they got safe on the broader part of the road, and they walked gently down toward the king's house. And what should they see as they returned the last corner but the last of the king's troop riding through the gate? "Oh, Curdie!" cried Irene, clapping her hands. "My king papa is come!" The moment Curdie heard that, he caught her up in his arms and set off at full speed, crying, "Come on, mother dear! The king may break his heart before he knows that she is safe!" Irene clung round his neck, and he ran with her like a deer. When he entered the gate into the court, there sat the king on his horse, with all the people of the house about him, weeping and hanging their heads. The king was not weeping, but his face was white as a dead man's, and he looked as if the light had gone out of him. The men-at-arms he had brought with him sat with horror-stricken faces, but eyes flashing with rage, waiting only for the word of the king to do something. They did not know what, and nobody knew what. The day before, the men-at-arms belonging to the house, and as soon as they were satisfied the princess had been carried away, they rushed after the goblins into the hole, but they found that they had already so skillfully blockaded the narrowest part, not many feet below the cellar, that without miners and their tools they could do nothing. Not one of them knew where the mouth of the mine lay, and some of those who had set out to find it had been overtaken by the storm, and had not even yet returned. Poor Sir Walter was especially filled with shame, and had almost hoped the king would order his head to be cut off, for to think of that sweet little face down amongst the goblins was unendurable. When Curdie ran in at the gate with the princess in his arms, they were all so absorbed in their own misery and awed by the king's presence and grief that no one observed his arrival. Curdie went straight up to the king, where he sat on his horse. "Papa! Papa!" the princess cried. "I'm here!" The king startled. The color rushed to his face. He gave an inarticulate cry. Curdie held up the princess, and the king bent down and took her from his arms. As he clasped her to his chest, and big tears went dropping down his cheeks into his beard. And such a shout arose from all the bystanders that the startled horses pranced and capered, and the armor rang and clattered, and the rocks of the mountain echoed back the noises. The princess greeted them all as she nestled into her father's chest, and the king did not set her down until she had told them all the story. But she had more to tell about Curdie than about herself, and what she did tell about herself none of them could understand except the king and Curdie, who stood by the king's knee stroking the neck of the great white horse. And still, as she told what Curdie had done, Sir Walter and others added to what she told, even Ludi joining in the praises of his courage and energy. Curdie held his peace, looking quietly up into the king's face, and his mother stood on the outskirts of the crowd, listening with delight, for her son's deeds were pleasant in her ears, until the princess caught sight of her. "And there is his mother, King Papa," she said. "See, there, she's such a nice mother, and she has been so kind to me." They all parted as the king made a sign to her to come forward. She obeyed, and he gave her his hand, but could not speak. "And now, King Papa," the princess went on, "I must tell you another thing. One night long ago Curdie drove the goblins away and brought Ludi and me safe from the mountain, and I promised him a kiss when we got home, but Ludi wouldn't let me give it to him. And I don't want you to scold Ludi, but I want to tell you that a princess must do as she promises." "Indeed, she must, my child, except if it's wrong," said the king. "There, give Curdie a kiss." And as he spoke, he held her towards him. The princess reached down, threw her arms around Curdie's neck, and kissed him, saying, "There, Curdie, there's the kiss I promised you." Then they all went into the house, and the cook rushed to the kitchen, and the servants to their work. Ludi dressed Irene in her shiniest clothes, and the king put off his armor and put on purple and gold, and a messenger was sent for Peter and all the miners, and there was a great and grand feast, which continued long after the princess was put to bed. And that's the end of Chapter 30. Chapter 31 is called The Subterranean Waters. The king's harper, who always formed a part of his escort, was chanting a ballad which he made as he went on playing his instrument, about the princess and the goblins and the prowess of Curdie, when all at once he stopped, with his eyes on one of the doors of the hall. Thereupon the eyes of the king and his guests turned there so. The next moment, through the open doorway came the Princess Irene. She went straight up to her father, and with her right hand stretched out a little sideways, and her forefinger, as her father and Curdie understood, feeling its way along the invisible thread. The king took her on his knee, and she whispered in his ear, "Do you hear that noise?" "I hear nothing," said the king. "Listen," she said. The king listened, and a great stillness fell upon the company. Each man, seeing that the king listened also. And the harper sat with his harp between his arms, and his finger silent upon the strings. I do hear a noise, said the king, a noise as of distant thunder. It is coming nearer and nearer. What can it be? They all heard it now, and each seemed ready to stand to his feet as he listened. Yet all sat perfectly still. The noise came rapidly nearer. What can it be? Said the king again. I think it must be another storm coming over the mountain, said Sir Walter. Then Curdie, who at the first word of the king had slipped from his seat and laid his ear to the ground, rose up quickly, and approaching the king said, speaking very fast, Please, your majesty, I think I know what it is. I have no time to explain, for that might make it too late for some of us. Will your majesty give orders that everyone leave the house as quickly as possible and get up the mountain? The king, who was the wisest man in the kingdom, knew well there was a time when things must be done and questions left till afterwards. He had faith in Curdie, and rose instantly, with Irene in his arms. Every man and woman, follow me, he said, and he strode out into the darkness. Before he reached the gate, the noise had grown to a great thundering roar, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. And before the last of them had crossed the court, out after them from the great hall door came a huge rush of turbid water, and almost swept them away. But they got out safe out of the gate and up the mountain, while the torrent went roaring down the road into the valley beneath. Curdie had left the king and the princess to look after his mother, whom he and his father, one on each side, caught up when the stream overtook them and carried away safe and dry. When the king got out of the way of the water, a little up the mountain, he stood with the princess in his arms, looking back with amazement on the ensuing torrent, which glimmered fierce and foamy through the night. There Curdie rejoined them. Now, Curdie, said the king, what does it mean? Is it what you expected? It is, your majesty, said Curdie, and proceeded to tell him about the second scheme of the goblins, who, fancying the miners of more importance to the upper world than they were, had resolved, if they should fail, to flood the mine and drown the miners. Then Curdie explained that the miners had done to prevent it. The goblins had, in pursuance of their design, let loose all the underground reservoirs and streams, expecting the water to run down into the mine. For they had, as they supposed, not knowing of the solid wall behind, broken a passage through into it. But the readiest outlet the water could find had turned out to be the tunnel they had made to the king's house, the possibility of which catastrophe had not occurred to the young miner until he had laid his ear to the floor of the hall. What was to be done? The castle appeared in danger of falling, and every moment the torrent was increasing. We must set out at once. But how to get at the horses? Shall I see if we can manage that? Said Curdie. Do, said the king. Curdie gathered the men-at-arms and took them over the garden wall and so to the stables. They found their horses in terror. The water was rising fast around them, and it was quite time they got out. But there was no way to get them out, except by riding them through the stream, which was now pouring from the lower windows as well as the door. As one horse was quite enough for any man to manage through such a torrent, Curdie got on the king's white charger and, leading the way, brought them all in safety to the rising ground. Look, look, Curdie, cried Irene, the moment that, having dismounted, he led the horse up to the king. Curdie did look, and saw, high in the air, somewhere about the top of the king's house, a great globe of light, shining like the purest silver. Do you remember who that is? Is it her great-grandmother? Oh, cried Curdie, that is your grandmother's lamp. We must get her out. I will go and find her. The house may fall, you know. My grandmother is in no danger, said Irene. Here, Curdie, take the princess while I get on my horse, said the king. Curdie took the princess again, and both turned their eyes to the globe of light. The same moment there shot from it a white bird, which, descending from with outstretched wings, made one circle round the king and Curdie and the princess, and then glided up again. The light and the bird vanished together. Now, Curdie, said the princess, you see my grandmother knows all about it, and isn't frightened. I believe she could walk through that water, and it wouldn't wet her one bit. But, my child, said the king, you will be cold if you haven't got something more on. Run, Curdie, my boy, and fetch anything you can lay your hands on to keep the princess warm. We have a long ride ahead of us. Curdie was gone in a moment, and soon returned with a great rich fur, and the news that dead goblins were tossing about in the current about the house. They had been caught in their own snare. Instead of the mine, they had flooded their own country, whence they were now swept up and drowned. Irene shuddered, but the king held her close. Then he turned to Sir Walter and said, Bring Curdie's father and mother here. I wish, said the king, when they stood before him, to take your son with me. He shall enter my bodyguard at once, and wait further promotion. Peter and his wife, overcome, only murmured an almost inaudible thanks. But Curdie spoke aloud. Please, your majesty, I cannot leave my father and mother. That's right, Curdie, cried the princess. I wouldn't if I was you. The king looked at the princess and then at Curdie with a glow of satisfaction. "I too think you are right, Curdie," he said, "and I will not ask you again. But I shall have a chance of doing something for you sometime." "Your Majesty has already allowed me to serve you," said Curdie. "But, Curdie," said his mother, "why shouldn't you go with the king? We can get on well without you." "But I can't get on very well without you," said Curdie. "The king is very kind, but I could not be half the use to him that I am to you. Please, your Majesty, if you wouldn't mind giving my mother a red petticoat, I should have gotten her one long ago, but for the goblins." "As soon as we get home," said the king, "Irene and I will search out the warmest one to be found, and send it by one of the gentlemen." "Yes, that we will, Curdie," said the princess, "and next summer we'll come back and see that you wear it." Curdie's mother, she added, "Shan't we, King Papa?" "Yes, my love, I hope so," said the king. Then, turning to the miners, he said, "Will you do the best you can for my servants tonight? I hope they will be able to return to the house tomorrow." The miners with one voice promised their hospitality. Then the king commanded his servants to mind whatever Curdie should say to them, and after shaking hands with him and his father and mother, the king and the princess and all their company rode away down the side of the new stream, which had already devoured half the road, into the starry night. And that was the end of chapter 31. And we have one more chapter. But before we do our last chapter, because our summer reading program has started, have you signed up for your READSquared accounts online? Well, if you haven't, you should, because if you do and you're listening to this, and I tell you your code word every day, when you put in the code word, you can get a raffle ticket. And with the raffle tickets, you can be entered to win a book. So today's code word is goblins. So if you put that into your READSquared account, let me know, and you'll get a raffle ticket. Thanks for watching today. So our last chapter is called The Last Chapter. Are you ready? All the rest went up the mountain and separated in groups to the homes of the miners. Curdie and his father and mother took Ludi with them. And the whole way a light, of which all but Ludi understood the origin, shone up their path. But when they looked round, they could see nothing of the silvery globe. For days and days the water continued to rush from the doors and the windows of the king's house, and a few goblin bodies were swept out into the road. Curdie saw that something must be done. He spoke to his father and the rest of the miners, and they at once proceeded to make another outlet for the waters. By setting all hands to the work, tunneling here and building there, they soon succeeded. And having also made a little tunnel to drain the water away from under the king's house, they were soon able to get into the wine cellar, where they found a lot of goblins, among them the queen, for the water had swept away the barricade which prevented the men-at-arms from following the goblins. And they had greatly widened the passage. They built it securely up, and then went back to their labors in the mines. A good many of the goblins with their creatures escaped from the inundation out upon the mountain, but most of them soon left that part of the country, and those who remained grew milder in character, and indeed became very much like the Scotch brownies. Their skulls became softer as well as their hearts, and their feet grew harder, and by degrees the goblins became friendly with the inhabitants of the mountain, and even with the miners. But the latter were merciless to any of the goblins' creatures that came their way, until at last they all but disappeared. The rest of the history of the Princess and Curdie must be kept for another volume. And that's the end. We finished! What did you think? Did you like that story? I think it was very interesting. I think Curdie was very, very helpful. If he hadn't been there, it would not have been good. I'm really glad that he was able to protect Princess Irene and they were all able to get out. And I like that at the end the goblins eventually came to live in harmony with the people. I like that idea. Thanks for reading this with me. Tomorrow we're going to start Peter Pan. So be ready for that. Join me tomorrow for another Armchair Adventures. Have a fun day.